The steady hum of shopping carts filled the air inside the bustling supermarket in Manhattan, New York. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated rows of neatly stocked shelves as customers moved through their routines. At the center of the store stood Theodore, the manager, a tall man with slicked back hair, a sharp suit, and an even sharper tongue. He prided himself on efficiency and control, but beneath the polished exterior was a man who thrived on power and intimidation. He scanned the store with a hawk-like gaze, always on the lookout for anything or anyone that disrupted the flow of his domain. His attention was drawn to an elderly woman standing in the snacks aisle. She was holding a package of cookies in her frail hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she squinted at the price tag. "Excuse me, miss, but are you buying that, or are you just here to waste time?" Theodore's voice cut through the air like a whip, loud enough for others nearby to hear. The woman looked up, startled. She was petite, with silvery hair tucked under a simple scarf, wearing a faded sweater that had clearly seen better days. Her face bore the kind of lines that told stories of hardship and resilience, but her expression was calm as she met Theodore's eyes. "I was just checking the price," she said softly, her tone unassuming. "It seems different from what's listed on the shelf." Theodore let out a dramatic sigh, placing his hands on his hips. "Of course, it's always about the price, isn't it? Let me save you some time. If you can't afford it, there are plenty of other stores you can try." His voice dripped with mockery, his smirk spreading wider as a few heads turned to watch the exchange. A faint flush crept across the woman's cheeks, but she stood her ground. "I wasn't complaining. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an error. That's all." "Errors," Theodore scoffed, shaking his head. "You think a store like this makes errors? Listen, lady, either buy it or move along. I've got better things to do than deal with people who want to argue over a couple of cents." The woman hesitated, her hand lowering the package of cookies back onto the shelf. Her eyes, tired but dignified, lingered on Theodore for a moment longer. "It's not just about the money. Sometimes it's about respect." Her words hung in the air, carrying a weight that made Theodore's smirk falter for the briefest moment. But he quickly recovered, waving her off dismissively. "Respect? Respect is earned, not given," he retorted. "Now, if you're done, I suggest you leave so real customers can shop." Emma didn't reply. She adjusted her scarf, straightened her posture, and walked away with slow, deliberate steps. Her departure left a strange quietness in her wake, broken only by the murmurs of a few bystanders who had witnessed the scene. Some shook their heads in disapproval, while others simply turned back to their shopping, unwilling to get involved. Theodore shrugged off the attention, muttering under his breath as he returned to his station near the customer service counter. He felt no remorse, only a faint annoyance at the old woman's attempt to challenge him. To him, she was just another complainer, another obstacle in his quest for an efficient, orderly store. What Theodore couldn't know, however, was that his careless words and dismissive attitude had set something far greater into motion. Emma's quiet departure was not the end of their encounter, but the beginning of a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. Theodore hadn't always been this way. His arrogance and sharp edges were products of a life built on survival and ambition. Born and raised in Queens, New York, Theodore grew up in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and drafty windows. His father was a factory worker, and his mother juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Despite their hard work, money was always tight, and the constant stress turned their home into a pressure cooker of arguments and unspoken resentments. From an early age, Theodore learned that the world wasn't kind to the weak. At school, he was bullied for wearing secondhand clothes and bringing lunch in old, mismatched containers. He fought back the only way he knew how, by becoming tougher, sharper, and louder than anyone who dared to challenge him. By the time he reached high school, he had mastered the art of intimidation, masking his insecurities behind a facade of confidence. But Theodore wasn't just tough. He was smart. He excelled in math and business classes, dreaming of a future far removed from his humble beginnings. He wanted power, control, and the kind of success that would make people respect him. After graduating, he took night classes in business management while working at a local grocery store. The job was grueling, with long hours and demanding customers, but Theodore saw it as a stepping stone. He climbed the ranks quickly, impressing his supervisors with his efficiency and ability to enforce rules without hesitation. When he landed the role of manager at a prominent supermarket chain in Manhattan, he saw it as proof that he was finally rising above his past. But with success came a new mindset, one that equated status with superiority. Theodore began to see people not as individuals, but as pieces in the machinery of his store. Employees were tools to maintain order, and customers were either assets or liabilities to the bottom line. He became known for his strict policies and no-nonsense attitude, earning respect from his superiors but fear from his subordinates. To Theodore, his approach wasn't cruelty, it was survival. He believed that the world was a battlefield, and that only the strong deserved success. His childhood had taught him that compassion was a weakness, a luxury he couldn't afford. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Theodore had always measured his worth by his achievements, but deep down he struggled with a gnawing sense of emptiness. He avoided looking too closely at his reflection in the mirror, afraid of the boy he might see staring back. The boy who had once dreamed of being more than just powerful. The encounter with Emma, the elderly woman in the cookie aisle, barely registered in Theodore's mind as he moved on to other tasks that day. To him, she was just another customer who didn't understand how the world worked. But somewhere, buried beneath layers of pride and ambition, her words lingered. Sometimes, it's about respect. Theodore brushed off the thought, returning to his usual routine of monitoring employees and handling store operations. Still, there was a nagging unease he couldn't quite shake. A tiny seed of doubt planted by a woman he had dismissed as insignificant. If he had paused to consider her words, he might have recognized the parallels between his own journey and hers. But Theodore was too consumed by his drive for success to see the lesson staring him in the face. Little did he know, the world had a way of humbling even the proudest among us. And soon, Theodore would come face to face with a truth he could no longer ignore, one that would force him to confront not just his actions, but the man he had become. Emma shuffled down the crowded streets of Manhattan, her worn shoes tapping softly against the pavement. The bright lights and towering buildings loomed around her, but she walked with quiet dignity, her gaze steady and her posture firm. She clutched her simple tote bag close to her side, its faded fabric a testament to years of careful use. To anyone passing by, Emma appeared to be just another elderly woman lost in the chaos of the city. Her clothes were modest, her scarf slightly frayed, and her face bore the gentle creases of age. But there was something in her eyes, an undeniable depth, a wisdom that seemed to transcend time. Beneath her quiet exterior lay a life filled with stories, struggles, and triumphs that no one in that supermarket could have imagined. Emma wasn't always this unassuming figure navigating the bustling streets. Decades ago, she had been a force to be reckoned with. Born in the heart of Brooklyn during the Great Depression, she grew up in a world where resilience was a necessity, not a choice. Her father, a shopkeeper, had instilled in her the values of hard work and treating every customer with respect, no matter their background. As a young woman, Emma had an eye for opportunity and a mind for business. While working as a cashier at a small grocery store, she began to dream of something bigger. Her dreams took shape when she met her late husband, Richard, a kind-hearted man who shared her vision of building something that could make a difference. Together, they started a small store that prioritized community and affordability, a store that would eventually grow into the global empire known as Walmart. But Emma's path to success hadn't been easy. She had faced countless obstacles along the way. Skepticism from investors, the challenge of competing against established businesses, and the societal biases that dismissed her capabilities because of her gender. Through it all, she remained steadfast, guided by the principles she had learned as a child: integrity, empathy, and determination. After Richard passed away, Emma quietly stepped away from the spotlight, choosing to live a simpler life while still overseeing the company from behind the scenes. She believed in walking among the people her store served, ensuring that the values she and Richard had built their business on were upheld. That's why she often visited different Walmart locations, posing as an everyday customer to observe how employees treated people and to understand the challenges on the ground. Theodore, of course, had no idea who she was when he mocked her in the cookie aisle. Emma didn't wear her wealth or status like a badge. She found more joy in blending in and connecting with the world around her. But that day, as she walked away from the supermarket, her heart was heavy. Not because of Theodore's rudeness, but because of what it represented. She had built Walmart on the foundation of respect and service, believing that every customer deserved to be treated with dignity. Seeing an employee, especially one in a leadership position, behave so callously struck a chord deep within her. It wasn't just about her. It was about the countless people who might have been treated the same way. Emma wasn't one to act impulsively. Instead, she returned to her modest apartment and sat by the window, sipping a cup of tea as she thought about her next steps. The city buzzed outside, but Emma's focus was inward, her mind sifting through memories of her journey and the lessons she had learned. Respect isn't a privilege, she murmured to herself, her voice steady. It's a right. That night, Emma made a decision. She wasn't angry at Theodore. She had seen too much of life to waste energy on anger. Instead, she saw an opportunity to teach a lesson, one that would ripple far beyond that single store. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a while, speaking with a calm authority that belied her humble appearance. "Hello, this is Emma," she said. "I need a favor. There's a store I'd like to visit again tomorrow, and I'll need some help making an introduction." Her words were simple, but her tone carried the weight of someone who had built an empire from the ground up. Emma wasn't just a customer. She was the quiet force behind a billion-dollar legacy, and she was about to remind Theodore and everyone else of the values that truly mattered. The following day at the supermarket began like any other. Theodore walked in with his usual air of authority, greeting no one and immediately reviewing reports. He was a man of routine, and his morning always started with a round through the aisles, checking for anything out of place. It wasn't long before he noticed something unusual. Several employees were whispering among themselves near the customer service counter, their faces a mix of curiosity and nervousness. Theodore frowned, straightened his tie, and approached them briskly. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The employees quickly scattered, but not before one of them muttered, "There's someone important here." She asked to speak with the manager. Theodore raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Someone important?" he repeated under his breath. He turned toward the front of the store, his confident stride carrying him to the customer service desk. Standing there was the old woman from the previous day, Emma. But something was different. She wasn't alone this time. Flanking her were two sharply dressed individuals, one of them holding a clipboard and the other wearing a polished name tag that read, "Regional Director." For a moment, Theodore froze. His brain struggled to reconcile the frail woman from yesterday with the composed figure now standing in front of him, surrounded by an aura of quiet authority. Her scarf and sweater were the same, but her demeanor carried an undeniable presence, as though the entire store revolved around her. "Good morning," Emma said calmly, her voice cutting through the silence. "We meet again." Theodore blinked, his instincts screaming at him that something was off. He cleared his throat, and forced a smile. "Ah, yes, I remember you. Is there something I can help you with today?" Emma's eyes softened, but there was a glimmer of something sharper behind them. Resolve. "Actually, there is. I wanted to introduce myself properly. My name is Emma Richardson." The name struck Theodore like a thunderbolt. It was a name he had seen countless times in company newsletters, emails, and even the training materials he'd once skimmed. Emma Richardson, co-founder and principal owner of Walmart. The clipboard-wielding assistant stepped forward, confirming what Theodore already feared. "Mr. Theodore," they began, "allow me to introduce Mrs. Richardson. She is here to conduct a surprise evaluation of this location." The blood drained from Theodore's face as his mind raced to process what was happening. Yesterday's humiliation of this unassuming woman now loomed over him like a storm cloud. "Mrs. Richardson," he stammered, I didn't realize." Emma raised a hand, silencing him with a calm but firm gesture. "You didn't realize who I was." She finished the sentence for him, "and that's fine. I don't expect special treatment because of my position. What I do expect is that every customer, no matter who they are, is treated with respect and dignity." Theodore swallowed hard, his usually steady confidence crumbling under her measured words. The employees nearby watched with a mix of astonishment and satisfaction, many of them silently cheering for Emma. "I've spent my life building this company," Emma continued, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "Not just to provide affordable products, but to create an environment where people are valued, whether they're buying groceries or working behind the counter. Yesterday, I saw something in this store that doesn't align with those values." Theodore felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. "Mrs. Richardson, I assure you, that was a misunderstanding. I was simply trying to—" "Enough." Emma's voice was quiet but final. "This isn't just about me. It's about what you represent as a leader. If you can't show compassion and respect to a single customer, what example are you setting for the rest of your team?" The store fell silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone within earshot. Theodore's arrogance, once his shield, now felt like a heavy burden dragging him down. He opened his mouth to respond, but found that no words came. Emma studied him for a moment, then glanced at the regional director. "I'll need a full report on this location, including employee feedback," she said. "And I'd like to have a private conversation with Mr. Theodore in the office." Theodore's heart sank. He knew this wasn't just about yesterday's incident. It was about everything, his leadership, his behavior, and whether he truly deserved the position he had worked so hard to attain. As Emma walked toward the office, the crowd parted for her as if she were royalty. Theodore followed, his head bowed, the gravity of the situation finally settling in. Inside the office, with the door closed, Emma gestured for Theodore to sit. "Let's talk," she said, not as a manager and a boss, but as two people. "I think you have some things you need to understand." Theodore sat stiffly in the office chair, the walls around him suddenly feeling much smaller than they ever had. Across the desk, Emma sat with the calm poise of someone who had seen more in her lifetime than he could imagine. There was no anger in her eyes, no trace of malice or spite. Just a quiet disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Theodore shifted uncomfortably, his usually sharp tongue now paralyzed. He had been in countless meetings, handled confrontations with difficult customers, and even faced irate supervisors. But nothing had prepared him for this. Emma broke the silence first. "Theodore," she began, her voice steady, "do you know why I'm here today?" He hesitated, unsure if there was a right answer. "To evaluate the store," he ventured, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Emma nodded slightly. "Yes, that's part of it. But my visit isn't about spreadsheets or inventory reports. It's about people. The people who work here, the people who shop here, and the people who make this company what it is. Theodore's gaze dropped to the desk in front of him, guilt beginning to creep in. Mrs. Richardson, I know what I said yesterday was wrong. I didn't mean... Emma held up a hand, stopping him gently. This isn't about apologizing to me. I'm not here to humiliate you or tear you down. But I do want to understand something. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching his. When you spoke to me yesterday, what were you thinking? The question caught him off guard. Theodore opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling to articulate a response. I was thinking about keeping the store running smoothly, he said finally. I was trying to keep things efficient, Emma finished for him, her tone neutral. I understand that. Efficiency is important. But tell me this. Was there a moment when you saw me as more than just an inconvenience? Theodore's face flushed. The truth was undeniable, and it stung to admit. No, he said quietly. I didn't. Emma nodded again, her expression unreadable. Do you know why I started Walmart? He looked up, caught off guard by the question. To build a business, he guessed. Emma smiled faintly, the lines around her eyes softening. To build a community, she corrected. When my late husband and I opened our first store, we didn't think about profits or expansion. We thought about the people who came through our doors. We wanted to create a place where everyone felt valued, whether they had $1 to spend or 100. Respect doesn't cost a thing, Theodore. But when it's missing, it leaves a debt that's hard to repay. Her words hit Theodore like a hammer. He thought back to his own upbringing. The humiliation of wearing hand-me-downs, the sting of being dismissed by others who thought he didn't matter. Somewhere along the way, he had sworn never to feel that way again. But in his quest for success, he had become the very thing he once despised. I didn't mean to treat you or anyone like that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I showed weakness, I'd lose control. Emma's eyes softened with understanding. Control isn't about being the loudest or the toughest, she said. It's about leading by example. Do you think your team respects you because you're strict? Or do they fear you because you've never shown them kindness? Theodore didn't have an answer. The truth was painfully clear. Emma leaned back in her chair, giving him space to process her words. You've worked hard to get where you are, she said. I see that. But hard work isn't enough if you lose sight of what matters. Leadership isn't just about rules and results. It's about people. For the first time, Theodore felt the weight of his choices. Not just yesterday, but every day he had spent building his career on the backs of others without acknowledging their worth. He thought about the employees he'd reprimanded, the customers he'd dismissed, and the respect he had demanded but never earned. What can I do to fix this? He asked, his voice raw with sincerity. Emma studied him for a long moment before answering. You start by listening, not to me, but to the people around you. Listen to their stories, their struggles, and their ideas. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn day by day. She stood, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. I'll be watching, Theodore, she said, her tone neither harsh nor forgiving. Not because I want to see you fail, but because I believe you can change. The question is whether you believe it too. As she walked toward the door, Theodore felt a strange mix of shame and hope. Emma had given him something he hadn't expected, a chance to be better. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in his chest. The desire to truly make a difference. Theodore left the office feeling as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The words Emma had spoken replayed in his mind, cutting through his usual bravado. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, convinced that power came from authority, not understanding the weight of the human connections he had neglected. Walking through the store, everything felt different. The familiar aisles, the beeping registers, even the employees he passed. It all seemed sharper, more vivid, as if he was seeing it for the first time. But this time, he wasn't looking through the lens of control or efficiency. He was seeing the people behind the roles. His assistant manager, Karen, was stocking shelves in aisle 3, her movements quick and practiced. She had been with the store for nearly a decade, but Theodore realized he knew almost nothing about her life beyond her work performance. By the deli counter, Javier, one of the younger employees, was helping an elderly customer choose the freshest cut of meat. Theodore had always seen him as just a part-timer, but now he wondered what dreams Javier had beyond his shift. Theodore paused near the customer service desk, watching as a new hire nervously tried to assist a frustrated shopper. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to intervene with a sharp remark or barked instructions. Instead, he took a deep breath and walked over. "Hi, everything okay here?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. The customer looked startled, clearly not expecting a manager to step in. The new hire stammered an apology, but Theodore held up a hand. "You're doing fine," he assured them before turning to the customer. "Let's figure this out together." It was a small moment, but it marked a shift, one that didn't go unnoticed by the staff. Over the next few days, Theodore began to make a conscious effort to connect with his team and the customers. At first, it felt awkward, almost unnatural. Asking someone how their day was, complimenting their work, or simply thanking them for their effort. It was new territory for him. Karen noticed it first. During a staff meeting, Theodore didn't rush through the agenda as he usually did. Instead, he asked for input, genuinely listening to suggestions. When one employee mentioned a persistent issue with the store's outdated scheduling system, Theodore didn't dismiss it as he might have in the past. "That's a good point," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "Let's figure out how we can make that better." The team exchanged surprised glances. Was this the same manager who had once scoffed at their concerns? Theodore also began spending more time on the floor, not just overseeing operations, but actively engaging with his team. He learned that Karen was supporting her elderly mother while saving for her daughter's college tuition. Javier, as it turned out, was studying business at night and dreamed of opening his own food truck one day. Even the new hire, Mia, was juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet. These stories humbled Theodore. He saw a reflection of his own struggles and their experiences, times when he had felt overlooked or undervalued. Slowly, he began to understand the kind of leader he wanted to be, one who lifted others up rather than tearing them down. One afternoon, as he was walking through the break room, he overheard a group of employees chatting. "Did you see how he helped that customer earlier?" One of them said. "Yeah," another replied. "It's weird, but he seems different." Theodore didn't interrupt, but the words stayed with him. He hadn't realized how deeply his behavior had affected his team, nor how much his efforts to change were already making an impact. Emma returned to the store a week later, this time without the entourage. She moved quietly through the aisles, observing the interactions around her. She noticed Theodore helping an older woman reach a can on the top shelf, his smile genuine as he handed it to her. She saw him laugh with Javier by the produce section and nod in agreement as Karen explained a new idea for stocking displays. When Emma approached him near the registers, Theodore straightened, his expression equal parts nervous and hopeful. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, "it's good to see you again." Emma smiled warmly. "It's good to see you too, Theodore. You seem different." He scratched the back of his neck, a sheepish grin breaking through. "I'm trying," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said." "And?" Emma prompted gently. He took a deep breath. "And I realized you were right. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you show first. I'm learning that now." Emma's smile widened. "That's a good start," she said. Remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It's about progress. As she turned to leave, Theodore felt a strange sense of relief. Emma hadn't come to judge him or dwell on his past mistakes. She had come to see if he was willing to grow, and he knew he was. Weeks passed, and Theodore's transformation continued, albeit in small, yet profound ways. Each day felt like a test, a chance to prove to himself, to his team, and to Emma that he was committed to the change he had promised. He spent less time in his office, more time on the floor, and, most importantly, more time listening. His interactions with employees became more genuine, and the once strained atmosphere of the store began to shift. The employees started to respond. Too, Karen, who had always been cautious around him, began to trust him more, offering suggestions and asking for his input on store operations. Javier, inspired by Theodore's support, began taking on more responsibilities, and even Mia, the new hire, had gained enough confidence to suggest improvements to the store's layout. But there were still moments when Theodore caught himself slipping back into old habits. He would walk past a checkout lane and feel the temptation to bark orders or rush through tasks without considering the people behind them. He'd remind himself of Emma's words. Leadership isn't about perfection. It's about progress. And he'd stop, breathe, and try again. One afternoon, as Theodore was walking past the produce section, he spotted an elderly man struggling to reach a bag of oranges on the top shelf. Without thinking, he reached up, grabbed the bag, and handed it to the man with a smile. The elderly man blinked in surprise. "Thank you, young man," he said with a warm smile. "I'm always grateful when someone takes the time to help." Theodore nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. "It's my pleasure," he replied. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" The man shook his head. No, this is enough. Thank you." As the elderly man walked away, Theodore's smile faded slightly. When did I stop seeing people like him? He thought. When did I start seeing them as problems to solve instead of people to care for? It was a sobering realization, but one that fueled his desire to keep improving. Later that week, the store held its monthly performance review meeting, where management would assess various departments and discuss the progress of the store. Theodore had once dreaded these meetings, knowing they were filled with nothing but criticism and complaints. But this time, he felt a different kind of anticipation, nervous but hopeful. As he sat at the head of the table, Karen, Javier, and Mia took their seats, each of them visibly more relaxed than they had been in the past. The energy in the room had changed, no longer tense but collaborative. The meeting began as usual, with reports on sales, inventory, and staffing issues. But then, it was Theodore's turn. "Before we move on," he said, his voice calm but steady, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the work everyone's been doing here." The room fell silent as the team exchanged glances. They weren't used to Theodore giving praise, let alone addressing them directly. "I know I haven't been the easiest person to work with," he continued, looking around the table at each of them, "and I want to apologize for that. I've spent too much time focusing on the numbers, the deadlines, and the bottom line. But I've come to realize that none of that matters if we don't take care of the people who make it all possible." The team, Karen's eyes widened in surprise, and even Javier looked up from his notepad, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I want to do better," Theodore went on, "and I'm asking for your help. If you have suggestions, ideas, or concerns, please speak up. Let's make this store the best it can be, not just for our customers, but for each other." There was a long pause before Karen spoke. I never thought I'd hear you say that," she admitted, her voice a little shaky. "But thank you. It means a lot." The meeting that followed was unlike any Theodore had ever experienced. For the first time, it wasn't about who was doing the best or what targets had been missed. It was about how they could work together to create a better environment. Ideas flowed freely, and everyone felt heard. By the end of the meeting, the team had outlined several changes to improve efficiency and employee satisfaction, from a new scheduling system to more team-building events. That afternoon, as Theodore walked through the store, he spied Emma in the same spot she had been the first day she had visited. She was watching as always, but this time there was no entourage. Just her, quietly observing the way things had changed. He approached her, and for the first time, there was no tension between them, just a mutual understanding. Mrs. Richardson, he greeted her with a genuine smile. "It's good to see you." Emma returned the smile. "It's good to see you too, Theodore. How's everything going?" He nodded, his eyes scanning the store. "It's different. A lot better. I think we're on the right track now." She studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I can see that, and I'm proud of you." Theodore blinked, surprised by her words. "You are." Emma's smile deepened. "Yes, change is never easy, but you're showing that you're capable of it. I'm impressed." Theodore felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had worked so hard to make things right, and hearing Emma's approval meant more than he had realized. "You've got a long way to go," she added, her voice gentle, "but you're on the right path. Just remember, leadership is about people. Always." As Emma walked away, Theodore watched her for a moment, reflecting on everything that had led him to this point. He was no longer the manager who barked orders from behind a desk. He was learning to lead with empathy, humility, and most importantly, respect. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally becoming the man he had always wanted to be. The final test came sooner than Theodore expected. It was a crisp morning in late fall, and the store was bustling with customers preparing for the upcoming holiday season. Theodore stood at the entrance, greeting customers with a smile, something he never would have imagined doing just months ago. He had been working tirelessly on creating a more positive environment, focusing on building relationships with his employees and leading with empathy. He had earned the respect of his team, and for the first time, he felt like he was in control, not because of his position, but because of the trust he had built. But today, something fell off. As he walked through the aisles, Theodore noticed a tension in the air. The usual hum of the store's routine seemed different. People weren't smiling as much, and the conversations between employees seemed more rushed than usual. When he reached the customer service desk, he saw Karen standing there, speaking urgently with a customer. Her face was pale, and her voice was tight with stress. He approached cautiously, his heart skipping a beat. "Karen, what's going on?" Karen looked up, her eyes filled with worry. "We've got a problem, Theodore. There's been a miscommunication with a large order from one of our suppliers. They're claiming we didn't pick up an important shipment, and now we're running low on stock for several key items. The holiday rush is starting, and we need those items to be on the shelves." Theodore's pulse quickened. He had promised himself that he would handle problems differently now, but the weight of the situation was already making his chest tighten. He knew that the success of the store during the holiday season could make or break their quarterly numbers. His mind raced as he processed the information, but rather than panicking, he reminded himself of what Emma had said. Leadership isn't about perfection. It's about progress. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's fix this." He turned to the customer, who had been listening patiently, his expression less hostile than Theodore had expected. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Theodore said, his voice steady but sincere. "We're doing everything we can to resolve this. I'll personally make sure you're taken care of today, and I'll follow up to ensure this doesn't happen again." The customer surprisingly nodded. "I appreciate that. It's just frustrating, you know." "I understand," Theodore said. "Thank you for your patience." Turning back to Karen, he asked, "What's our next step?" "We need to contact the supplier and confirm the order details. We can try to work out a solution with them." But time is critical, she replied. Theodore took charge. Call the supplier. I'll handle the rest. Let's make sure we're being proactive, not reactive. He immediately went to the back office, where Javier and Mia were preparing the shipment. I need you two to help me out, he said. I want to prioritize the most urgent items for the shelves. We need to make sure we're not leaving customers empty-handed. Javier and Mia nodded, already on task. For the next few hours, Theodore worked tirelessly alongside his team, moving between departments, coordinating logistics, and communicating with the supplier. There were moments of frustration. Phone calls that went unanswered, inventory that didn't match up, customers who were upset. But Theodore remained calm. Every time he felt his old instincts to control or shout take over, he stopped, breathed, and refocused. He knew now that leadership was about resilience, not perfection. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be there for his team and trust them to do their part. As the day wore on, the store began to stabilize. The supplier had finally confirmed the delivery, though it would be delayed by several hours. But by the time the sun set, Theodore's team had managed to restock the shelves with the most important items. There were still some gaps, but the store was in a better position than it had been earlier in the day. The last customer of the evening was a regular, an older woman named Mrs. Jacobs, who always shopped late to avoid the crowds. She had been watching Theodore's team all day, silently observing as they worked under pressure. As she approached the counter, she smiled at him. "Thank you, Theodore," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I've been shopping here for years, and I've never seen this store run so smoothly during a crisis. You really changed." Theodore was taken aback by her words. He had been so focused on the task at hand that he hadn't noticed the way people had started to view him differently. There was no longer any fear in their eyes when they looked at him, just respect. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Jacobs," he said, his voice steady but grateful. "I've been trying to make sure that we do our best for everyone who walks through those doors." She patted his arm gently. "I can see that. Keep it up, son. You're doing good." As she walked out of the store, Theodore felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The day had been a test, and for once, he didn't feel like he had failed. He hadn't been perfect, but he had handled the crisis with a calmness and composure that had been absent before. More importantly, he had done it with his team. He hadn't had to do everything himself. When he looked around the store, he saw his employees cleaning up, finishing the day's work, and talking quietly amongst themselves. They weren't just co-workers anymore. They were a team. And for the first time, Theodore felt like he was truly part of that team. As he walked to the back office to close up for the night, he saw Emma standing near the entrance. She had been quietly observing the whole day. "You did well," she said with a small, approving smile. "I knew you could handle it." Theodore smiled back, a mixture of pride and humility in his expression. "Thank you. I think I'm finally starting to get it." Emma nodded. "You're not perfect, Theodore, but you're on the right path. And that's all anyone can ask for." As she left the store, Theodore stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything he had learned. He had faced his demons, confronted his weaknesses, and come out stronger on the other side. He wasn't the same man who had arrogantly dismissed his employees, the one who saw leadership as a game of control. He was someone new, a leader who understood that the heart of leadership was compassion, humility, and the willingness to grow. And for the first time in years, Theodore felt at peace with himself.